Look down at your kitchen trash can right now, a coffee filter, a torn envelope, the plastic film off something you ate 20 minutes ago. By tomorrow, it will be gone, hauled away by a truck before you wake up, and you will never think about it again. That single bag holds more discarded material than your ancestors threw away in a season. And the strange part is what happens to it after the truck leaves. It does not vanish. It goes into the ground, and it stays there, sealed and almost perfectly preserved, longer than anything your great-grandparents ever built on purpose. The trash you make today will outlast you by centuries. So what did people do before trucks, before bins, before the word garbage even meant anything? For most of the time humans have existed, there was no such thing as away. There was only here, and the things you no longer wanted, and the problem of what to do with them. That problem turns out to be one of the most revealing records our species ever left behind. Start with the oldest version of the question. Go back roughly 300,000 years to a small band of people moving across the landscape with almost nothing they could not carry. A digging stick, a few hides, some stone tools. When you own that little, you barely generate waste at all. The bones get cracked for marrow and the scraps get eaten by something else. The plant fibers rot back into the soil within a season. And when the ground around camp got fouled, when the smell built up and the flies arrived and the parasites started to spread, you did the simplest thing imaginable. You left. You picked up your single bag of possessions and walked to a clean patch of earth a few miles away. Anthropologists who studied this directly found the pattern holds even now. Frank Marlowe spent years with the Hadza of northern Tanzania, one of the last groups still living mostly by hunting and gathering, and the camps he documented were temporary by design. A site gets used, the refuse builds, and the band moves on before it becomes a health threat. John Woodburn, who worked with the Hadza for decades starting in the 1950s, described how the spatial layout of a camp keeps the latrine area, the sleeping area, and the eating area separate, an invisible architecture of cleanliness with no walls and no rules written down anywhere. The waste management strategy of the first 300,000 years of human life was mobility. You did not deal with your trash. You outran it. That single fact explains why archaeologists love the moment humans stopped running, because the day people decided to stay in one place is the day they started building piles. And those piles are where the entire story of who we were is buried. The technical name for an ancient trash heap is a midden, from an old Scandinavian word for a domestic refuse mound. And a midden is the single richest object an archaeologist can find. Think about what ends up in one. Animal bones tell you what people ate and which seasons they hunted. Shells tell you they lived near water and how warm that water was. Charcoal tells you what they burned. Broken pottery tells you how they cooked and stored. Seeds and pollen, trapped in the layers, reconstruct the landscape that surrounded the people who lived there. A grand temple tells you what a society wanted you to believe about itself. Its garbage tells you the truth. The most dramatic of these are the shell mounds, called kitchen middens by the Danish zoologist Japetus Steenstrup, who in the 1840s was the first to argue that these heaps were not natural beach deposits, but the leftovers of human meals. Along ancient coastlines, groups ate so much shellfish over so many generations that the discarded shells piled into actual hills. At Emeryville, on San Francisco Bay, the German archaeologist Max Uhle excavated one in 1902 and found two distinct layers, an older one full of oyster shells and a newer one full of clams, a quiet record of a bay changing over centuries, written entirely in the things people threw out after dinner. Then there is Japan, where the relationship between garbage and meaning gets genuinely complicated. The Jomon people built shell mounds across the islands for thousands of years, and roughly 2,700 of them still survive. At first, archaeologists read them the obvious way, as kitchen dumps, but when they looked closer, the dumps started behaving strangely. At the Kitakogane site in Hokkaido, near a freshwater spring, researchers found a mound built almost entirely of grinding stones used to crush nuts. And nearly every single one had been deliberately broken before it was placed there. These were not worn-out tools tossed aside. They were working stones, intentionally destroyed and then laid down in one spot. The best guess archaeologists have is that this was a place to ritually retire tools, possibly an act of gratitude to the tools themselves or to the water that fed the settlement. In other Jomon mounds, they found human burials tucked among the shells, the skulls of deer arranged in careful patterns, and decorative spoons carved from whalebone and deer antler. At one site, 14 sets of human remains were buried inside what looked like an ordinary refuse heap. So a question that sounds simple: what did ancient humans do with their trash? Run straight into something we did not expect. For the yeoman, the boundary between throwing something away and giving it back was not clear at all. The same mound that held fish bones and broken pottery also held their dead and their ceremonies. The place where things ended was sacred. That should make you pause the next time you scrape a plate. The instinct to treat the end of a thing's life as meaningless is not universal. It is something specific to us, and it is recent. Now jump forward to the moment garbage became an emergency. Around 10,000 years ago, farming took hold, and farming meant staying put for good. You cannot walk away from your wheat field when the camp gets dirty. For the first time, large numbers of people had to live alongside their own accumulating waste, year after year, generation after generation, and the consequences are written into the ground at one of the oldest cities on Earth. Çatalhöyük, in what is now central Turkey, was home to as many as several thousand people starting around 7,400 years before the Common Era. The anthropologist Sarah Hill called it not only one of the earliest known cities, but one of the world's oldest landfills, and the description fits. The archaeologist Lisa Marie Shalido studied the site's refuse layers under a microscope, slicing the midden so thin that individual layers less than a millimeter thick became visible. Each one a single act, a single sweep of a hearth, a single load of dung burned for fuel, a single discarded basket. What she found revealed two contradictory truths about these people living side by side. Inside their homes, the inhabitants of Çatalhöyük were meticulous. They replastered their walls roughly every month. Even under a microscope, the floors show barely any ash or dust, which means someone was sweeping them constantly. They cared visibly and consistently about keeping their living space clean. And then they carried everything they swept up and dumped it directly outside into massive open middens packed between the buildings, full of food waste, ash, and human feces. The cleanest homes in the ancient world sat a few feet from some of the foulest refuse heaps, and the people walked between the two every day. They had solved the inside of the problem and not even started on the outside. That gap, clean home, filthy street is the entire history of urban sanitation in a single image, and it took thousands of years to close. By around 500 years before the Common Era, the Athenians passed what may be the first municipal waste law, requiring refuse to be dumped at least a mile beyond the city walls and banning people from throwing garbage into the streets. They did not destroy the trash. They relocated it, pushing the problem to the edge of vision and declaring it solved, which is more or less the same move a garbage truck makes today. The Romans turned that move into an industry, and they left behind the single most staggering monument to human consumption ever built. In Rome, there is a hill called Monte Testaccio. It is about 35 meters tall, nearly a kilometer around at its base, and it is covered in grass and trees. Walk up it, and you might mistake it for any other rise in the landscape. It is not. It is made entirely of broken pottery. Every fragment under your feet is a piece of a shattered amphora, the large ceramic jars Romans used to ship olive oil. Archaeologists estimate the hill contains the remains of 53 million of them. Here is why it exists. Olive oil seeps into the porous clay of an amphora and turns rancid, which means the jars could not be cleaned and reused like wine vessels. So once the oil was decanted into the city's warehouses, the empty jars were worthless. The Romans hauled them to one site near the river port, carried them up the growing mound, smashed them in place, arranged the shards into stable terraces, and sprinkled lime over the pieces to kill the smell of spoiled oil. At its peak in the late 2nd century, they were depositing around 130,000 amphorae a year. This was not a careless pile. It was an engineered, state-managed waste facility with retaining walls and pathways and a logistics system behind it. And because the Romans stamped their jars with information, painted labels recording the weight of the oil, the official who inspected it, and the province it came from, Monte Testaccio is also an accidental archive. The economist José Remesal and his team from the University of Barcelona have spent decades reading those stamps, and they have reconstructed the supply chain of an entire empire from its garbage. Where the oil came from, how the volume rose and fell across the years, when Spain stopped supplying it and North Africa took over. Rome wrote countless monuments to its own glory. The most honest record it left of how it actually worked is the trash heap nobody was supposed to read. This is the thread running through all of it. The thing a civilization throws away tells you more than the thing it keeps, because nobody curates their garbage. Nobody lies in their trash. An American archaeologist named William Rathje made that idea into a science. Starting in 1973, Rathje pointed the tools of archaeology, the careful sorting, the cataloging, the measuring, not at an ancient site, but at the landfills of Tucson, Arizona. He called it the Garbage Project. And over the following decades, his teams hand-sorted tens of thousands of pounds of modern refuse from cities across North America. What they found dismantled the things people believed about themselves. When Rathje compared what people said they ate and drank with what was actually in their bins, the two did not match. People reported drinking far less alcohol than the cans in their trash revealed. They threw away around 10% of the food they bought. During a beef shortage in the 1970s, when meat was scarce and expensive, people did not waste less of it. They panic bought it in bulk and threw more of it away rotten. The survey is a story you tell about yourself. The garbage is what you did. And when Rathje's teams dug into the landfills themselves, they found something that should change how you picture the word away. The things we throw out do not break down. Excavating refuse buried since the 1950s, they pulled up newspapers still readable, the print legible, the headlines intact, decades after burial, hot dogs, corn cobs, lettuce, recognizable. Paper, not plastic, turned out to be the single largest occupant of landfill space, almost half by volume, and it was barely decomposing at all. The modern landfill does not digest our waste, it mummifies it. So return to the bag under your sink. For 300,000 years, the human relationship with refuse was simple and physical. You ate, the scraps returned to the earth within a season, and when the ground got dirty, you walked to cleaner ground. The waste rejoined the world almost as fast as you made it. Nothing lasted. We broke that cycle in 2 stages. First, we stopped moving, which forced us to pile our waste beside us and invent every sanitation system that followed. Then we started making things the earth cannot easily take back and burying them in sealed pits where nothing breaks down at all. Your ancestors generated waste that disappeared and possessions that lasted a few years. You generate possessions that disappear in months and waste that lasts 1,000 years. We reversed it completely. The Jomon buried their dead among their discarded shells because to them the end of a thing was not the end of its meaning. The Romans built a mountain out of what they no longer needed and accidentally preserved their whole world inside it. And somewhere right now, a truck is pulling away from your street, carrying the most durable thing you will make this week toward a pit where it will sit, intact and unread, long after everyone who ever knew your name is gone. Look down at your trash can one more time. Future archaeologists already are. If you found this strange or worth thinking about, like the video and subscribe because the next one is already being dug up.